Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, the 13th meeting in 2013 of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. Can I welcome all members and remind everyone, please, to turn off all mobile phones and other electrical devices which might interfere with the sound equipment. We have apologies this morning from Margaret McDougall, who's not well. I'm also very pleased to welcome Bruce Crawford, constituency member for Stirling, who's here for his constituency interest in item 2 on the agenda. Welcome, Bruce. Right, item 1 on the agenda. Can I ask members if we are happy to take item 4 and 5 on the agenda in private? Is that agreeable?
Agreed.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, item 2 on the agenda is an evidence session in relation to Bannockburn 2014, which is something the committee has received quite a lot of correspondence about. Very pleased to welcome our panel of witnesses this morning, and I'll just introduce them starting on my left-hand side. We have Sir Malcolm McGregor, who is the convener of the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs. We have Joanna Boyd, who's leader of Stirling Council. From the National Trust for Scotland, we have Peter Selman, who's Director of Properties and Visitor Services, and also project sponsor for the Battle of Bannockburn project, and David McAllister, who is the project director of the Battle of Bannockburn project. And from Scottish Government, we have Caroline Packman, who's Director of Homecoming Scotland. So welcome all. Thank you for coming along. Now, I think before we go into questions, I think both National Trust and you, Caroline Packman, wanted to say something by way of an introduction. So maybe we could start, David McAllister, with yourself from National Trust, and then we'll go on to Caroline after that. So, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, convener and members of the committee, and thank you for the invitation to attend this morning. I'm David McAllister, the National Trust for Scotland's Project Director for the Battle of Bannockburn project. And as Convener said, I'm joined by Pete Selman, who is the project sponsor for the Battle of Bannockburn project. You've asked us to respond to questions concerning the accountability, the planning, the resourcing of Bannockburn 2014. And in our letter to the committee, we sought to clarify the point that the Trust is involved in 2 distinct projects centred on the Bannockburn site. The first of these is the Battle of Bannockburn Visitor Centre. We are working in partnership with Historic Scotland to develop interpretation and learning installations with a new state-of-the-art Battle of Bannockburn Visitor Centre, which are now well advanced in construction. Indeed, I was on site all day yesterday, and there's a great deal of progress. As part of this project, we're carrying out significant landscaping works around the site through which we will restore dignity to the battlefield and its monuments and reaffirm the heritage significance of this place. The total project cost is £9.1 million, and this is entirely funded through capital grants to the NTS. The Scottish Government has pledged £5 million, and a further £4.1 million has been generously allocated by the Heritage Lottery Fund. The displays and the exhibits within the new centre will utilise the latest technology. We have commissioned award-winning architects, interpreters and digital designers to bring the battle to life. Bright White Limited is designing the interpretation and the exhibits, bringing their experience of using new technology to improve understanding within visitor attractions. This team is working with the Centre for Digital Design and Visualisation, a partnership between Historic Scotland and the Glasgow School of Arts Digital Design Studio, and in building an innovative digital exhibition that will give visitors a unique understanding of what it would have been like to be at Bannockburn 700 years ago. An exciting centrepiece of the new centre will be a detailed and highly interactive presentation on how the battle was fought and won. All of this technology rests on telling vivid stories and relaying historical facts. And we are working with a distinguished panel of academic experts to ensure that our interpretive materials are as accurate as they are striking. We wish to immerse the visitor in the realities of 14th century life and to challenge many modern myths and preconceptions. Award-winning architects Riachan Hall have been appointed to design the new centre building, and landscape architects Ian White Associates appointed to adapt the topography to one more representative of its historic design and purpose. The proposals for all of this have been carefully thought out to open up the views to the commemorative monuments and provide better visitor facilities than we have ever had before. The second project element you have asked us to comment upon is the Battle of Bannockburn reenactment event, which is now due to take place over the long weekend of the 28th to the 30th of June 2014. And this follows the opening of the new centre in order specifically to mark the anniversary of the battle. We had long decided that there would be another reenactment to mark this unique occasion. The last such event we'd staged by the Trust was in 2007 and was considered successful, using our connections with experienced reenactors of medieval battle to attract large numbers and we did make a modest profit. Building on our positive experience in 2007 and to promote the newly opened visitor centre, the Trust has for some time been preparing to mount a 2-day reenactment in the summer of 2014. However, following an approach by Visit Scotland and the Homecoming team, we have been pleased to initially consider and subsequently agree to expand the Trust's event, both in scope and duration, with the event now to take place over 3 days, as I've said. We suspect that there may have been some confusion through media reporting because the Trust's reenactment has become conflated with the wider Homecoming programme and with prior circumstances concerning clan involvement in that wider programme. A newspaper report erroneously suggested that the Battle of Bannockburn reenactment would not be going ahead if government financial support was not forthcoming, and the headline attached to a later report indicated that public money was to be used to bail out the event. Neither report was correct. The reenactment would have been going ahead irrespective of any financial support from government agencies. However, with the £250,000 of support now offered through Events Scotland, Creative Scotland and Scotland's Food and Drink Industry Division, we are delighted to be able to extend the Trust's event by 1 day and to add significantly more content in terms of promotion of Scottish produce, literature, song and the provision of space and activities for the clan societies and organisations. This exciting programme and content proposed means this will now be promoted as a signature event within the Homecoming 2014 programme. The additional funds allow the Trust to expand the event on a cost-neutral basis, but the lion's share of the cost does remain with the Trust, something in the order of £500,000. And these costs will be met through ticket sales, concessions and the sale of merchandise. Any profits made from the latter elements will be reinvested to help meet the costs of conservation that the Trust as a charity has to bear for the benefits of the nation's heritage. The detailed programming of the event and the business plan on which it is to be based are being developed through the tendering process to appoint a professional event organiser in order to take the reenactment forward. At this point, we've identified a preferred contractor, Unique Events, and we're in the process of finalising costs before making a formal appointment with them. Branding the event as a battle reenactment gives the event a focus, but the scope and content of the overall event will be considerably broader. Certainly, there will be large-scale battle sessions in which the highly professional Clan Ranald group will lead a vivid and historically accurate impression of what the conflict would have been like, along with other reenactors from across the world. This is not to celebrate violence and death, but to do justice to those on both sides, most of whom were ordinary farmers and peasants, called to war by their feudal masters, who fought and died on this site, and also to give some idea of the ordeal that they underwent. However, most of the event content is actually taken up with other activities. The reenactors will be giving small-scale weapons demonstrations and will create an encampment in which visitors can see what routine life was like for campaigning soldiers and for all who followed them. Additionally, as I've tried to convey, there will be much else to see, to do, to sample and experience. People will enjoy spectacle and entertainment, it is true, But this is an excellent means for engaging people in the historic reality, tackling some myths about the battle and the era it was fought, and yet retaining sense of dignity and commemoration. We are aiming to keep ticket prices at the most reasonable levels possible, with a charge of around £40 for a family ticket for an entire day's entertainment. The latter compares very favourably with a family trip to the cinema, for example. Tickets will be sold in advance, and we expect to have up to 15,000 people to come to Bannockburn on each of the 3 days of the event. In summary, we are grateful for the government support that has been provided for both the centre and the reenactment event. And we are also very grateful for the excellent cooperation and support we have received from Historic Scotland, Visit Scotland, Creative Scotland, Scotland's Food and Drink, and Stirling Council. We see this as an investment in Scotland's heritage that will pay dividends in terms of learning and understanding, and in the direct and indirect economic benefits that will be generated for the area by visitors coming to Stirling from far and wide. The Trust is a charity and is not a party political organisation. We work with all elected representatives. There can be no denying the central importance of Bannockburn in shaping Scotland's history, nor the fact that 2014 is the 700th anniversary of Bannockburn, and that this occasion deserves commemoration. The Trust's main interest is to ensure that this significance is understood in its context, the interplay of international events and cultural mores which led up to the battle and what happened afterwards. That is why the focus of this project is on a visitor centre and the interpretive materials it will contain. After the opening ceremony and the reenactment event is over, it is the centre that will endure to tell the story of Bannockburn. The Trust will focus on historical fact and providing a unique visitor experience. It is for others to make wider interpretations and pronouncements. However, it is interesting to note that constitutional change is now dealt with through debate and the political process, rather than warfare and the loss of life. Perhaps the most apt lesson anyone can take away from this important site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr McAllister. I'm looking forward to the event already. Given your sales pitch, I'm sure my children will enjoy it even more.
I'm sure they will.
Thank you. There's quite a number of issues you've raised I think we'd like to explore in questioning, but before that I'm going to introduce Caroline Packman. I know, Caroline, you'd like to say something by way of introduction.
Convener. Visit Scotland is delighted to be working with the National Trust for Scotland, Stirling Council and the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs to develop the Bannockburn event. As members of the committee will probably know, the Homecoming programme was launched at the end of last month, and we have over 100 events already in the programme. 2014 is going to be a very exciting year for Scottish tourism. The Homecoming programme is designed to extend the benefits of the Commonwealth Games and the Ryder Cup through offering a year-long programme of events designed to attract more people to Scotland, give them more reasons to visit and to extend their stay. The programme for 2014 builds on the focus years which the tourism industry has been delivering since 2010. So the themes for the year are food and drink, active, creative, natural, with the added theme of ancestry. The year will be supported by a £5.5 million events and marketing programme, which will showcase the best that Scotland has to offer around the world. Within the programme, Visit Scotland is delighted to be including the Bannockburn event. It will be a signature event for Homecoming, and as such will form a key moment in the year-long programme. Through Visit Scotland's marketing teams, we're already promoting it. For example, at Scotland Week earlier this month in North America. Also last week at Visit Scotland's Expo, where Bannockburn and indeed the Homecoming programme overall was enthusiastically welcomed by over 800 travel operators from around the world. 2014 will be a terrific year for the visitor economy in Scotland. It's a year when we will welcome the world, and Bannockburn will be a key part of that success story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, there's quite a number of issues I think we'd like to explore in the questioning, particularly around some of the funding arrangements that Mr McAllister, you touched on, around issues around governance, given there's public money involved, looking at how the benefits of the Year of Homecoming spend can be spread beyond just the Bannockburn event to different parts of Scotland, and some of the question around risks and how we'll measure outcomes. Now, we've got obviously quite a large panel today, and there's quite a lot of ground to cover, so I'd be grateful if members could keep their questions short and to the point, and similarly, if the answers could be short and to the point, that would be very helpful. And I'd ask members if they would direct their questions at a particular panel member rather than just generally. But if you're on the panel and you want to respond to a question or come in on a discussion, if you just catch my eye, and I'll bring you in as time allows, and that way we'll get through the business as expeditiously as we can. If I could maybe start off, Mr McAllister, just with a point of clarification, given what you've told us this morning. In the written submission that you gave us a few weeks ago, you said in the end, at the very end of that, the National Trust of Scotland's Board of Trustees would be making a final decision on whether the event would proceed. The trustees would need to be satisfied that the trust would not be put at financial and reputational risk, and this decision is expected by the end of April 2013. I take it from what you've told us that that decision has now been taken. Is that right? So the event is now definitely to proceed, and, the trustees are happy with that.
And through myself and Pete, we are keeping our board informed of progress and the detailed discussions on the creation of the event, etc. They too have raised a number of concerns over risk and the development of the proposals, so we're reporting regularly on that basis. But yes, we have our board's approval.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. If I just to broaden the discussion out for a moment in relation to Homecoming 2014. One of the key aspects of the Homecoming 2009 that was so important for Scotland was its ability to attract the Scottish diaspora, particularly from North America. Now, we've heard quite a lot of comment, and some of it's in the written submissions, around the fact that a battle reenactment at Bannockburn may not be an event that will attract people to Scotland in the way that a clan gathering event would have done, in the same way that the gathering event in 2009 did. I wonder, are you satisfied that the Bannockburn reenactment, particularly given its timing quite early in the season, is going to attract visitors from North America to the extent that a clan gathering would? And maybe I could ask Malcolm McGregor to address that first, because Malcolm, in your written submission, that's a point that you make on behalf of the Standing Council of Clan Chiefs.
Right, Mr. Convener, thank you very much. And first of all, if I could just say it's a privilege for me to be here in the Parliament with your committee to discuss these affairs and these matters, and to speak as best I can on behalf of the clans. The question you pose, one has to think back a bit to 2009, which succeeded in bringing a lot of people from overseas, and much of what has been in the pipeline for 2014 has to bear that in mind. The gathering, the international gathering of 2009 was regarded overseas as a great success, and most of the diaspora, or the overseas Scots, wanted to do the whole thing again. A battle reenactment with a clan element does not have the same attraction to the overseas Scots as an international clan gathering. There is no doubt about that. However, the reenactment plans and what is planned at Bannockburn, in my view, is superb. And we, the Standing Council, myself, when we go to America later this year, will do our best to promote it. It is slightly late in the day, and the overseas team need a good 2 years lead time. But we are where we are, and we will do our best to promote it.
What is your reasonable expectation of the numbers who might come from North America to the Bannockburn event?
That is an extremely difficult question to answer. It depends how clan groups are able to marshal their members in America and Australia to bring them over. I can do some assessment of that, but I wouldn't want to put a figure on it. From 2009, the figure was something like 17,000, I think. I can get the figure for 2007.
Well, maybe we could.
It was
come back to that in a
17,000.
moment.
It was some 17,000 for 2009, and I don't believe that figure will be matched in 2014 because of the lack of lead time.
You said in your written submission that normally the North American clans would require 2 years prior notice of an event. So you're concerned that there's not enough time to attract them in large numbers.
If you want the large numbers from America, you need this lead time, without question.
Okay, maybe I could ask Caroline Packman if you come in on that.
Yes, thank you. I would just make the point that Bannockburn is not the only event within the Homecoming programme that will appeal to clans. There are a number that have specific appeal to clans. For example, the Inverness Highland Meeting, the Dunfermline Bruce Festival, Aboyne Highland Games, Pipeline Live. And within the overall programme, there are actually over 50 that have links to the ancestral theme. We've been working very closely with the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs, American Scottish Foundation, Council of Scottish Clans and Associations in North America to develop the programme with them. And we're also aware of around 30 other clan events which will be happening in Scotland in 2014, which are not open to the public as such, but we still are delighted that those clans will be making the journey back to Scotland in 2014.
Solomon, did you want to come in?
Thank you, convener, members. Yeah, obviously the event is going to benefit from being one of a number of events throughout a whole packaged year of Homecoming. And as event organisers, clearly we're acutely aware that the ability to draw visitors in sufficient numbers to make the event a success depends on us getting both the product right, the pricing correctly, and then marketing it effectively. And that's where we've been concentrating all our efforts. As David has spelt out to you, the nature of the event is very broad-ranging. It benefits also from having a powerful theme, the Bannockburn name, and with that, the centrepiece of reenactment events, and tying that into the new visitor centre and the excitement round about that. To a certain extent, it's already starting to pre-sell itself, and we already have a healthy level of inquiries. It's the pricing also which is quite important to us, and as David has mentioned, affordability consistent with the family audience as the core focus of it is really quite important to us. But this is an event which is open to all. It's open to Scots from near and far, and it's open to visitors from near and far, and within that, the clans who are in Scotland at the time are coming to Scotland for a broader range of events. So we're targeting a range of markets. We're confident in the product, confident in the brand, and working with our partners, the marketing of it, I think, will be highly impacting.
Thank you. Just before I bring in Chick Brodie and then Rhoda Grant, just one question for Caroline Packman. Malcolm McGregor mentioned the figure of 17,000 who came in 2009. Have you made an assessment of what a reasonable expectation is for 2014 from North America?
In total, we're expecting around 70,000 additional visitors as a result of the Homecoming programme. We haven't yet broken that down by 70, but
70,000
in total, but we have not yet broken that down by market.
We haven't, as we heard earlier, got a long time to go in terms of people planning their travel for the summer of next year. Do you feel that you're sufficiently focused on the North American market and who's going to be coming across?
Well, the North American market is our main overseas market, but also this time around, one of the key differences between Homecoming 2014 and 2009 is that ancestry is not the main theme, it's one of 5 themes. So because of broadening out the themes, it means that we do have broader appeal to different markets. The UK market in particular will likely have more of a reason to visit Scotland in the year of Homecoming than it did last time round. So, yes, the North American market is extremely important to us, but it's not the only market that we're targeting.
Thanks. I'll bring in Chick Brody.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for your early contributions. I wonder if I might ask Carolyn, what do you know of the Lion of Alba?
Is that, sorry, was that a question to
It
myself?
sounded a question. What do you know of the Lion of Alba?
The Lion of Alba, it's a sculpture that is being developed by Carrick Community Council, and I met with the organisers around 6 weeks ago, and present at that meeting were also representatives from Historic Scotland, Creative Scotland, so we discussed ways and perhaps that we might be able to work with the Community Council to progress that project and several others in the region.
It's encouraging to know that at least it's known, because having met them 6 weeks ago, the Carrick Community Councils, they were frustrated at, trying to be part of the Bruce Trail, which they're creating, and also the Lion of Alba sculpture at Turnberry, where Bruce was born. The Bruce Trail, they were trying to make sure that it was overall part of the programme, and I'm encouraged that at least we've had the meeting. How much of your marketing programme is being spent on the homecoming events?
The total homecoming budget is
The budget for Visit Scotland is £59 million. How much of that is being spent on the homecoming events?
Right, within the homecoming budget of the 5.5 million, 1.75 million of that is specifically for marketing. In addition, that will be supported through Visit Scotland's core marketing budget. All the activities that Visit Scotland conduct in from now on, from 2013 into 2014, will of course weave in the homecoming messaging throughout that, just as they're doing this year for Year of Natural, for example. So we have 1.75 million specifically for homecoming activity, but that will be supported by other activities.
Is that enough?
Pardon?
Is that enough?
We feel confident that with that amount we can generate the return on investment target of 8 to 1.
I wonder if I may ask, may I go on? John Boyd, why did you buy the IPR to the gathering?
Well, convener, in terms of what happened prior to the decisions taken in relation to the gathering, I was not directly, and I was not elected at that stage, but there was a decision taken under the previous administration to take those steps to secure that position. Of course, there have been subsequent meetings, discussions and decisions taken which have led to the decision not to hold a major clan gathering event, but rather to have an enhanced visitor experience at the Bannockburn weekend.
Just one last question. If I may, in terms of, and this sounds very promising, is the infrastructure going to be ready, or is it capable of handling the number of people that we're talking about?
Yes. Our just ongoing discussions with our preferred provider, Unique Events, have confirmed that, and we've just last week set up a number of subgroups which will be working with representatives of the council and the police, etc., specifically on those planning issues. So that's very much focus at the moment. But yes, broadly speaking, the site can take the numbers we're talking about. The infrastructure will be there. Okay. We've had discussions about parking provision. Stirling Council are indicating that they will be supporting us with a coach service from the city centre to the event, running for the 3 days, which we're very grateful for. So all these matters are being looked at in considerable detail right now.
Okay, I know the Deputy Convener wants to see some of these questions in a moment on infrastructure. Ruther Grant.
Just listening to the evidence this morning, it seems to me that Bannockburn reenactment was always going to happen. It was in the programme to happen. But yet we're very late in the day as promoting that as kind of the anchor event to homecoming, so late in the day that we're maybe going to lose out in our American market. Why were those decisions taken so late to actually almost spike our own guns, if you pardon the pun?
The Bannockburn project first came through our funded application process, which opened July 2012 through to September 2012. With all the other applications, we had 166 in total, went through the robust and rigorous evaluation process. And as part of that, it was identified that Bannockburn had the potential to become one of several signature projects within the overall programme. So that was the point when we began to work with the National Trust for Scotland to develop the plans and extend the activity around it. In terms of the time scale, we still have more than a year to go before the actual event. So especially considering that we're targeting a range of markets with the event, I feel confident that there is still plenty of time to maximise the benefits of the event and attract maximum numbers to it.
But we're getting evidence to say that this is late in the day. We should have been 2 years, at least a year ago, having those events to promote abroad to maximise them. Surely, I mean, you know, the gathering, you know, was very controversial, and kind of the fallout from the gathering was very controversial. Surely people should have been thinking about that way back then, as to find an anchor event that we could promote from that point forward. It seems to me lessons weren't learned, and suddenly we're scrabbling about at the last minute to pick on an event that was going to happen anyway, to try and make that iconic, to pull the whole thing together. You know, why was this not thought of earlier?
Well, my understanding is, because also I was not in post at the time, but my understanding is that the initial gathering at Stirling was intended to be the anchor for that. But then, due to the business case studies that were undertaken into it, a business decision was taken based on the risks and benefits that was not to be pursued. By that time, the Bannockburn application had come into us, and the decision was made to expand on that as an alternative, but not a direct replacement for a gathering.
On the back of that, you know, we heard that Bannockburn was going ahead. We've heard that a number of events are just normal annual events. How many of the events for the Year of Homecoming are unique to the Year of Homecoming?
Within the overall homecoming programme, as it stands at the moment, around 40% of the events are new, around 60% are enhancements to existing events, which is actually a deliberate decision, because what we don't want to do is help to create events that just simply last for 1 year and then aren't sustainable. We very much want to create a homecoming legacy as well, and ensure that we build capacity within the events industry in Scotland for the long term.
It would be helpful maybe to get a list of what's new, what is enhanced. You obviously won't have it here today. Can I just go back to David McAllister about the event itself? My understanding is that there is dispute as to where the Battle of Bannockburn actually took place, and you know, people have different views. I mean, what steps have you taken to make sure it's authentic, and indeed that nothing that you are doing is interfering with what could be a historical site that hasn't been validated at the moment?
Yes, there is much debate, and much of it very healthy. We have put together a very high-powered academic panel from the outset of the original, us taking forward a project at Bannockburn, and we're using that academic panel to verify, test and debate the events of 13-14. There is no one consensus. There are general themes, and we certainly know that the site that we look after was the site of the Bruce encampment and where he placed his standard. Certainly the second day of battle ranged over a vastly wider area in Stirling, and there is debate about where the main events happened. There is no doubt, however, that the site that we look after has been the site of commemoration and the site where monuments have been placed from the 1820s onwards. So it has built its own significance through that role as commemorating the events. So yes, we have part of the battle site. We've done a lot of work in all our interpretive materials that we'll showcase in the new centre to ensure that they're as accurate as possible. We've also built in, I suppose, the chance to change. If new information arises, then we'll incorporate it. Part of the experience includes an interactive battle experience where you can try and win the Battle of Bannockburn. And that is, we are able to test new theories on that. You'll just need to all come and try it. It's really good. But if there's another theory about the battle, we could go and try it on this modelling. It's a strategy gaming thing that we'll be developing. So you can test theories on it. But we will be showing what we believe to be the best consensus of the events. And we're taking the same approach with the reenactment. So engaging with our lead reenactors, Clanranald, working with them and their experience, working with Unique, who are one of Scotland's premier event organisers, we will make the event, the reenactment elements of the event, as authentic as possible, and try and remove some of the Braveheart type elements that we might otherwise have been tempted to include.
But what steps are you taking to protect other potential sites? I know there's concerns, that what we know is very limited, that there are people who say the battle actually took place somewhere else, and that those areas are being built on, changed, and there is a fair amount of concern that while we don't have a definitive position, things are moving on.
We are engaged in a lot of archaeological research, and through this summer we'll be doing a series of exploratory digs on other sites. We're engaged with the BBC to make a two-part archaeologically based two-part series of programmes leading up to the battle, which will be aired before the anniversary in 2014. And our academic panel are working with them, and that's with Tony Pollard and Neil Oliver, but with the BBC's archaeology unit as well. So again, there is a lot of activity planned identifying potential sites. So included within our 9.1 million project is quite a lot of additional archaeological work and looking for other evidence. It will also include a really quite fantastic dig your back garden weekend, because yes, a lot of houses have been built in Stirling since 1314. And we want to engage with a number of householders to see, is there anything in your back garden? And that will be part of the BBC programme as well. Well, it would be quite good to find something, because actually there's very little remaining. Well, there's really nothing. We have not found a night in the car park when we were building, for example. It would be great to find something. But I think one of the interesting facts about the battle was it was picked clean afterwards. I mean everyone seems to agree on that the spoils were removed. We have found no mass graves. We found really very little evidence. It would be great to find something in the next 12 months.
Mr. Selman, did you want to say something?
I think David has covered the answer in full.
Just before we move on, because Bruce Crawford wants to come in, but just before that, I just want to go back to a point Rhoda Grant made about the timing. I mean, I think there is an issue here because we are, as Malcolm McGregor said earlier, short on time in terms of marketing this, particularly to North America. A lot of the reason for that was the cancellation of the gathering by Stirling Council. Was there a breakdown of communication here between Stirling Council and the Scottish Government in terms of who was doing what? Joanna Boyd?
Convener, perhaps I can come in at this stage to indicate that I think, as has already been mentioned, that there was an exercise undertaken in terms of establishing a business case for the clan gathering. What that business case showed was a potential deficit in the running of such an event to the order of about £250,000. Now, at that stage, there were conversations taking place between elected members and officials at the council, along with Fergus Ewing and others at the Scottish Government. And it was felt at that stage that an enhanced event an extra day, essentially, at the Battle of Bannockburn would avoid those financial, reputational risks that were being flagged up at that stage. I think that there has been misreporting in the press that Stirling Council pulled the plug. I just want to make absolutely clear that this was a decision that was reached at by consensus, a mutually agreed position as between the Scottish Government and Stirling Council. So it's simply incorrect to state that we somehow pulled a plug on anything. And what I also ought to make clear is taking that course of action was a decision which achieved cross-party support within the council, so including our opposition. And indeed, a joint statement was issued, just highlighting the positive programme of events that will be taking place within Stirling in 2014. The communications around that, other than the joint statement that went out as between the council and the Scottish Government, was not the was essentially Stirling Council's involvement with that was through the joint statement. Any other communications, such as those with North America when various visits were taking place to discuss these issues with the clans, was certainly not the responsibility or within the remit of Stirling Council. So I hope, Convener, that assists in clarifying that chain of events.
Okay, thank you for that. I suppose the follow-up question to that is, and it's maybe not so much for you, it's more for Caroline from the Scottish Government perspective, is should that decision have been taken earlier so we had more lead-in time in terms of building up a replacement? Caroline.
Possibly in an ideal world, but we are where we are at the moment. We now have a very sound proposal on the table. We can now go forward and market that confidently. Certainly the lead time might be too short for some of the major clan groups, but we've already had very strong expression of interest in the Bannockburn event from clan societies. Expressions of interest from around 30 to 40 clans in participating. So we're very pleased with that. And clearly it will be one of the key projects that we're promoting in all our marketing materials going forward.
Crawford.
I wish the world was ideal. It would be great if it was. Big decision had to be made by the council. I fully appreciate that in terms of the circumstances together with the Scottish Government. And challenges, yes, are there, but the opportunities are significant. For what it's worth, I want to just congratulate the council and the government for the way they dealt with this, and for the way they worked together. I think it's been a good exercise. But I want to just ask one question at a wider scale, Convener, if that's good.
Well,
okay, one question on a parochial issue. That's okay.
Okay, yes, okay.
All related to this issue.
Yes, okay, carry on. Yeah.
But first of all, in terms of the Stirling situation, Joanna, in terms of what we've heard all about what's happening around Bannockburn, it's how we build on that now in terms of for the whole homecoming experience for that area. And I know there are a number of events that are being looked at, from things to do with Hogmanay, Spirit of Whisky Festival being made larger, food and drink festivals, angling festivals, building on the bloody crime festival issues. Do you feel that you're getting the adequate support that you require from Event Scotland and from Visit Scotland to make sure all these events can happen at the level you need to, in terms of the funding that's available? And to Caroline, I was lucky enough to be with you at Tartan Week, or part of it, a couple of weeks ago, and involved in a discussion with Visit Britain about how they can contribute also to the whole homecoming experience and attract people and market Scotland in a more successful way. I think it would be useful if the committee members were to understand what role Visit Britain are also going to play in this, bringing additional resources to the party, not just resources from Visit Scotland. So both of these areas would be of interest to me.
Perhaps, Convener, if I go first, and thank you. Thank you for the question, Bruce. So certainly, we do have an exciting programme built around, obviously, the Battle of Bannockburn being a signature event. But as Bruce has already highlighted, there is a programme of around about 10 events that we really are focusing in upon. And there is a working group within the council which reports into a committee. We also, as already been indicated, sit on various of the working groups to do with the Bannockburn weekend, but also to do with the Ryder Cup. So there is that cross section, if you like, of information that's coming to us. In addition to that, we have ongoing discussions with Visit Scotland and also directly with Fergus Ewing. So we will certainly, and those have been very positive and very useful, but certainly as we go on to do a cost-benefit analysis, which we are doing now, of those various events, some of them already have some funding. You mentioned the Bloody Scotland event, for example. But where we see, for example, the Hogmanay, I know there is a desire to have beefed up Hogmanays, if you like. So the bookends of the year 2013, 2014, those are the sorts of areas where we see it. Traditionally, they've been run at a cost to the council. So they're the sorts of events that certainly we would be looking to discuss with Scottish Government and Visit Scotland. And indeed, I know there's a desire to perhaps enhance those pre-existing events to really make sure that as much benefit comes to the area of Stirling and for the people of Stirling as is possible. And we have a meeting already scheduled for the 15th of May with Fergus Ewing to discuss matters such as those.
Okay, I'm bringing Dennis Robertson, who wants to ask about infrastructure.
Thank you, Convener. Before I come to maybe Joanna on the infrastructure at Stirling Council, can I ask a question to Mr McAllister regarding the visitor centre? I think you said that you're hoping that people can immerse themselves into the events of and sort of replicate the sort of 14th century experience. And you've taken great play on the fact that you've got award-winning architects, etc., to enable some of this to happen. Has any work been done to ensure that it will be fully inclusive? And that is, if you've got people with sensory impairment. For instance, if you've got deaf, hard of hearing people, is there a BSL digital infrastructure? Is there audio description for people who are blind and partially-sighted?
We're covering all of these. I mean, essentially, the Trust tries to be open to everyone, so that includes access for all. We've been working very hard with the Stirling Access Forum at every stage of development of the new building. So yes, we will have hearing loops for the hard of hearing, and we're working on programmes for.
And hearing loops. Hearing loops should be standard anyway under the legislation. I'm talking about inclusive aspect in terms of if you want people to have this immersion, if you wish to use that term, into the experience, maybe using BSL or audio description. So you've got people who are deaf, who loop is perhaps not accessible because they have no hearing. You've got people who are blind who perhaps can't use some of the digital touch screens, etc. What I'm suggesting is, have you done enough, and are you looking at that?
As I said, we are looking at all aspects of it and working with the Stirling Access Forum to cover all of these areas. Final decisions on some of this have yet to be made, but I'll take on board your points in terms of British Sign Language.
Maybe some of the national organisations, like Action for Hearing Loss and RNIB, for instance.
Yes, we've done that through the Access Forum, which is the way we normally operate.
Perhaps I can come to Joanna with regard to an infrastructure question. What barriers are there in terms of the infrastructure, for instance, with the Bannockburn and maybe some of the wider events, if there are any barriers, that is, in terms of infrastructure?
Well, in terms of our preparedness, if you like, for the year and everything that it will entail, that's clearly, those are matters that are being discussed through the various working groups. And I was reminded of the big noise concert, for example, that we put on in the Raploch last year. That was in June of last year, and there were in the region of 7,000 to 8,000 attendees at that concert, which I attended myself with my young daughter, and I have to say that it was smooth and it was free flowing. So that gives us some comfort, if you like, as to our ability to ensure that these things will go off as they ought to. In terms of barriers to infrastructure, there's already been mention of the shuttle bus that we hope in terms of this particular weekend. Around about the Ryder Cup, I know that's not an issue that you're directly concerned with, but there will be a park and ride facility, and Stirling we sit on the steering group as well, and obviously these issues are discussed there. and there will be provision at Stirling in relation to that park and ride facility. There has been discussion around about improvements of on and off slip roads on the M9, and that has been a long-standing aspiration of Stirling Council in terms of the overall improvement of the flow of traffic, and indeed in terms of creating a gateway into Stirling. That would also benefit the National Park, we consider, and certainly in terms of a piece of infrastructure legacy for Stirling. We consider that it's highly arguable that would constitute one.
So you're relatively comfortable then that you'll have everything in place in terms of park and ride, parking facilities. Are you having discussions with ScotRail, for instance, in terms of, is it additional trains, or are we looking at additional services, whether it be bus shuttles from maybe the train station, for instance?
Yes, so are you speaking specifically in relation to the Bannockburn? Yes, yeah. I think as was mentioned, what I am very keen that we avoid is one of the criticisms that's often expressed in relation to the visitors to the castle, and that is that people are bussed in, they visit the castle, and then they're bussed out again. So in terms of that transitional spend, if you like, it's not maximised to the extent that it could be. And I think what we are very keen to avoid with the events taking place at Bannockburn is that we do see that transitional spend, and indeed that visitors to Stirling experience the whole of Stirling and everything that it has to offer. So we will do everything that we can to ensure that the infrastructure exists to bring people into the city centre, for example.
What role is Visit Scotland playing in this to ensure that our hotels, guest houses, bed and breakfasts and other facilities are ready for the Bannockburn event?
The Visit Scotland partnerships team have already been conducting a number of workshops across the country. We're also planning to hold an industry conference on, I believe it's the 26th of September, specifically with regard to the events happening in 2014, and to ensure that everyone throughout the tourism industry is ready to welcome visitors from homecoming events, Ryder Cup and Commonwealth Games.
Thank you. Could I just offer a perspective, both as a client, as an investor in tourism infrastructure in Stirling, but also from my background professionally working with Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Development Agency, in developing tourism product and strategies in Glasgow, in Edinburgh and Dundee. This is Stirling's time. For so long, I think Stirling has been a visitor destination on a day visit trip from people who are staying for a longer period in Scotland in the larger urban conurbations or passing through on their way further north. And I think before NTS and our Board of Trustees decided to invest in a new visitor centre, we thought long and hard about whether or not that was going to be sustainable in the longer term. So we are equally interested and committed to working in partnership with all these agencies in order to make sure that the volume of visitors will not come just in the first 12 months out of curiosity to see the new Battle of Bannockburn Visitor Centre, but will come in repeated numbers. And to do so, we are just as interested in developing the whole infrastructure of Stirling, the city and the outlying district, in that range of hotel accommodation which we can now see coming out the ground, with the development of the park and ride facilities, with investment in a whole range of new attractions, from historic Scotland to the castle, through to the Wallace Monument, the presentation of the old town, and ourselves, of course, trading heavily on the name Bannockburn and that marketing impact that it can have. This is very much a joint initiative of investors and public agencies working with the local authority, and indeed, let's not forget, the local communities who will get the jobs and the income spinning off from this. And I just think that this is, as I said, Stirling's time to put itself on the map as a must-see destination and a critical mass of facilities where people will come and stay for longer than just touching base. Thank you.
Lastly, Convener, with reference to the clan gathering, is Stirling a possible location for the future, or do you believe that currently it doesn't have the infrastructure to support a clan gathering.
Is that, yeah, that's a
For the
question for
clan
me.
gathering, it's for Mr McGregor. Really.
Ah, right. I think Stirling is is a good location for a clan gathering. It's got the historical background with the castle, and you've got the Bannockburn facility as well. Infrastructure-wise, it is not as good, in my opinion, as some other places, such as Edinburgh. Not surprisingly, Edinburgh is a built destination, worldwide destination city. Having said that, people could stay in Edinburgh or Glasgow or Perth, and indeed in certain places in Stirling in big numbers. So Stirling is at quite a good crossroads from the main Scottish destinations, and it does have that good feel to it with the castle in the background. Obviously, in the future, with the enhanced visitor centre at Bannockburn is another major attraction as well.
Joanna, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, perhaps if I could just add one additional comment, and it really builds on the points I was making before about the long-standing council desire to have the infrastructure around about the on and off slip roads from the M9. Another piece of infrastructure that's been a desire of the council to see brought into existence is around about an outside events space, which would be around about the Falloninch field, which again you would arrive at from those slip roads. Now that's again, so far as I'm concerned, that's a piece of legacy for the people of Stirling, and indeed for any visitors to Stirling, which we could see coming out as a benefit from the year of homecoming and from all the events happening in 2014, and indeed perhaps there is a question of scale, of course, and that's a point I know that Malcolm's made in his submissions, but it would certainly be a space where events such as clan gatherings or indeed outside concerts, really with the fantastic drop of Stirling Castle, could be really another great draw to the city of Stirling, which has been described as being an ambition of all the partners sitting here before you today.
Okay, Mike McKenzie.
Thank you, Convener. Just to continue with that theme a wee bit, that it's unfortunate. I think in an ideal world, the year of homecoming and the gathering would have coincided. And without blame, that's not been possible. I wonder what lessons are there to be learned, because I assume that we seem to be having years of homecoming every 4 years, so I'm assuming we'll have one in 2018. I think that would be, and given that maybe some of the unfortunate aspects of this, what lessons are there for the future to ensure that maybe we can have both of these events coinciding?
Who would like to pick that? Caroline?
A comment. Certainly there are no plans in place at the moment for future years of homecoming, so I can't really comment on that question. But one thing that I would say that is a lesson to be learned from what has come out this time round is that if there is to be another clan gathering, then it really needs to be led by the clans for the clans. That's what happened last time round, and certainly government bodies need to be in a position to support that. But really it needs to be an event that is led by the clans. They know what they want from an event like this. They can mobilise their networks to ensure the visitation at it.
I mean, that's a very interesting line of thought, because I was going to suggest that perhaps Joanna's sitting right next to Malcolm. Maybe she should take these intellectual property rights out of her pocket and just pass them over right now to Malcolm. Would that really solve the problem?
Order, excuse me. Hold on a second. People should not be having conversations with the witnesses. Thank you. Sorry, Mike, come in.
Yeah, I'd suggested, Convener, that you know, that seems a good line of thought. Perhaps Joanna should just take those intellectual property rights out of her pocket, pass them to Malcolm right now, and then we set the scene for things happening in a better fashion in the future. Is that?
Malcolm, would you welcome taking on the intellectual property rights of the gathering?
I don't think I would, actually. It's an interesting idea from Mr. Mackenzie. I think if there was a good events company, and there is a good one dealing with Bannockburn in 2014, that could get their hands on it and analyse it and see what really is in the IP, because I'm not sure what's in it, then with the Standing Council in an advisory role, we could take the international clan gathering concept idea forward. And I absolutely take on board what Caroline has just said, that there is a role here for the clans worldwide to think very carefully about the future, irrespective of whether there's a homecoming or not. There is clearly a demand by clan groups from around the world to come to Scotland in quite big numbers if one gets the marketing and the lead time right. And they can be accommodated in various parts of Scotland, and that sort of concept and project could be taken forward and looked at at various levels, whether you have one location for an international clan gathering where it's held every 5, 6 or 7 years, or whether you vary it, or whether you do perhaps a combination of that, have low-key international gatherings, and every 5 years you ramp it up with a sort of homecoming-style event or year, homecoming-style year. So I think, sorry.
It seems to me there may be merit in you considering, you know, set up a subsidiary and, you know, go for it.
Well, we're not a business. And I don't think it would be a good idea for the Standing Council of Chiefs to get too hands-on with actually running gatherings and getting their hands on the IP, because we don't run events. What we are good at is advising and bringing people over from America and Australia, because we go to those places all the time, and many of us do so as well.
Thank you. And just, you know, on a separate line, I was a wee bit disturbed when Mr. Selman mentioned this idea of of tourism products, and that always disturbs me. And I'll try and explain what I mean so that I can maybe tease out some of your thoughts on this, because there are some aspects of our heritage, for instance, that I think get it exactly right in the way that actually National Trust and other organisations deal with them. For instance, if I go to Finlagan, I find the hairs in the back of my neck standing up. I get the similar experience if I go to Iona when it's not too busy, or when I go to Columba's mother's grave. But I don't get it, unfortunately, when I go to Culloden, with how things have been dealt with there. Somehow or other, and it's a difficult concept, I think, and it may be a difficult thing to get right, but somehow or other, and it's not just me, I talked to a lot of people about this, and so I've got a kind of concern about the visitor centre and the legacy. Are you, and I accept that you've chosen award-winning architects, and I think very good architects, but are you going to be able to maintain a respect or foster a respect for the spirit of the place that will engender a quality of experience for visitors beyond this immediate Bannockburn celebration or commemoration?
No, it's a fundamental question to our business, and I make no apologies for using business vocabulary, because we are in the heritage business and we have to be able to generate sufficient funds, particularly as a charitable enterprise, to look after the properties that are in our care. But you're absolutely right, the product that we are nursing is one which has got it's deep in our soul and our psyche of Scotland, and it's that sense of place which in all of our properties we're trying to bring out, and to do that by telling stories imaginatively, creatively, but not losing the sense of soul. Now, it's an individual thing quite clearly, but I think if you go to Culloden, I actually feel very, very proud there that we've got the sanctity of the battlefield, the atmosphere, you talked about the hairs on the back of your hand. By gum, you sense that. The sense of place is by no means disturbed by the interpretation on the site in subtle architecture that tells a story and the context and adds additional dimensions to it, which will bring visitors there in the first place. I think the balance at Culloden actually is pretty much spot on, but it's an ongoing challenge, whether it's an historic house which nobody visits, but we have to get people there in order to get that sense of place, or whether it's the mountain landscape where we don't need to do any artificial interpretation. The place speaks for itself, and it's what we don't do that perhaps will make the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I can accept that there are particular challenges, I suppose, with battlefields or in areas that have been, you know, developed over time, and perhaps to get back to that sense of place is a real challenge. It's a theme I've been exploring, you know, and it's not just my view that in some places you do it very, very well indeed, in others perhaps not so well. In terms of its relevance to business, I can tell you that when I go to Finlagan or maybe Dunstafnage Castle, those places affect me in a way which means that I'm far more likely to get my wallet out than unfortunately I felt when I visited Culloden.
One final comment. I mean, looking at the Bannockburn site, David in his introduction was mentioning the interpretation of the site itself and the sanctity of place, and reminding us that at the 650th anniversary there was the unveiling of the rotunda and the presentation of the flagpole. Her Majesty the Queen did the honours on that occasion. And part of the investment just now is an exciting story told in a new bit of architecture, but in an understated sense. The actual style of the architecture there is meant to draw the eye past it and on and up the avenue towards that rotunda. And when you get to that rotunda and you look at what the landscape architects are doing to remind us as to why the battle was fought here, where the sight lines are designed to enhance the view of the castle as the point of destination for the approaching army, and looking backwards where it had come from, it all begins to make sense. That's when the hairs start to come up on the back of the arm, and that's where I think we get the balance correct.
Well, look forward to experiencing that. Thank you.
Janet wants to come in. I should just say anything's got to be a big improvement of what's there at the moment. I mean, no insult to the National Trust, but it is a rather tired looking building. So
what's there at the moment is actually somewhere in between, because I was there yesterday all day, and we are conserving the monuments right now. And okay, there's work going on, but the hairs are on the back of you, and we are, I suppose, as Pete said, we're bringing dignity back. It is a landscape project because the battle was fought in this landscape, and at the rotunda you get a real sense of that. But you're right, what was there was not doing it. What we're doing will do it in spades.
It was just really one small point arising out of Mr Mackenzie's question, and that was in relation to the overall offer we think we have in Stirling for visitors from that sort of historical perspective. So really to think about how do we get visitors who are coming to the castle or to the Wallace Monument to actually come, and whether it's through cross-ticketing, for example. So we are very keen to work with the National Trust and with Historic Scotland to actually think of a way of how do we have people who are coming into Stirling to visit more than just one place, and perhaps to spend a whole day, a couple of days ideally, stay in the city and actually go around and experience all of these rich and diverse places that we have to offer.
Great, thank you. Alton Johnson.
Because of the issues that surrounded the gathering in Edinburgh in 2009, there's obviously, in fact, the Standing Council of Scottish Chiefs point out that we shouldn't actually go ahead with another gathering until we've reimbursed those creditors who suffered losses from their involvement. And while we're not having the same sort of event, it's clearly really important that this one does well financially. So I just wonder what the key aspects are for ensuring the financial success of the event. David McAllister, I think you spoke about 15,000 tickets a day, per day, for 3 days. And obviously you're looking at the pricing, you know, compared to a family trip to the cinema. How sure are you? I mean, you're obviously looking for a sellout for 3 days. How confident are you that this will occur?
Well, we obviously work to a business plan, and there's some caution built into the business plan. We are comfortable, and our board are comfortable that if we can hit 75% of those targets, we will have something that will not make a loss. Obviously, we would like to sell all the tickets, but selling tickets, as Unique point out to us, is a factor of, is it an event that you must go to? So you have to scale the event to attract the number of visitors. So all the marketing that we will be doing, and we're piggybacking on the homecoming marketing and other marketing initiatives, will be about selling tickets. It comes down to that. The success of the event is largely down to ticketing, and we want to do most of that online. So we'll be doing a deal with a ticketing provider to do that. We hope to have towards the end of June tickets on sale. It may be slightly into July, but a year in advance is our aim. We're capturing interest at the moment on our Battle of Bannockburn website. Call to arms. You can sign up. You can register now. We're doing the same with travel trade. There's a huge amount of travel trade interest in this event and Bannockburn as a whole, and that was brought home to me last week at Expo. So, yeah, every effort is focused on selling those tickets. The content of the event that we're developing with Unique is interesting, exciting, but appropriate as well, and it hits all the buttons for homecoming. So the whole package, this 3-day, three days of activity, interest, all sorts of interesting things going on, is what will sell the tickets.
Ask another question, convener.
On the same subject, I think Bruce Crawford had a supplementary on this point.
Supplementary
Bruce
on
come
that
in and then
issue.
come back. Yeah, sure.
I was at the Expo event at the Castle last week. I thought it was fantastic. 800 people from all across the world there. I'm one of these optimists in the world. I think we'll sell this out, no problem. What I'm more concerned about is actually when our friends from America decide to come, they might decide to come a bit later than normal, but they may turn up. Is there going to be enough tickets left for them? And how are we going to make sure that actually there's a capacity there to allow those visitors who turn up from other parts of the world to be able to experience the events that are going to be going on there? And how do we manage that process?
We will be working with the clans to make sure that that message gets out to the channels through Malcolm and the Highland clans, that the message will get out to them. We're in touch right now. We're working closely together. There'll be no doubt in the clans in America and in Australia, etc., that we're asking them to come.
Okay, good. Glad of that. Thank you.
Very small.
Yeah, okay, on this point. Yeah, Mark.
You said your target was 15,000. What physically would be the maximum you could sell per day?
Well, I think it comes down to the capacity of the site, and we've discussed with Unique at length, and we think 15,000. I wouldn't want it to be more than 15,000 for health and safety, just coping with it.
Thank you, convener. And obviously we want to make sure that local businesses and hoteliers and restaurants and so on have, experience as many benefits as possible. But on to wider Scotland, many people will come for this very attractive event. But I think Caroline Packman, you mentioned the fact that there would be, I think you said, 30 other clan events, perhaps even up to 50, occurring elsewhere, that some of these would be closed, but obviously we want to encourage as much direct engagement with Scots as possible. Could you give a bit more information about that? Because, while we have an event that's localised, we obviously want to make sure that we benefit the islands, the east coast, the borders as much as possible too.
As the programme stands at the moment, with just over 100 events, we already have events taking place in every single local authority area in Scotland. Now, we expect that number of events to grow significantly over the coming months as well. Part of the homecoming programme is the partner programme, whereby events can sign up not for financial support, but for in-kind marketing and promotional support. And those tend to be the events that have shorter lead time as well. So those events will continue to join the programme through the coming months and indeed into 2014. regional spread has very much been one of the objectives of designing the homecoming programme, and also seasonal spread throughout the calendar year as well. Of the projects that we're actually providing financial assistance to, we've got obviously we've got a lot of activity happening around Hogmanay and winter festivals, but apart from that, we've got a fairly even spread of funded programmes from March all the way through to October, because we don't want activity just to be centred in the summer months. So really, whatever time of year people come to Scotland and wherever they want to travel, there will be events that they can participate in and enjoy.
Just one final question, and you are confident that the clans know what is going on and there's constant liaison with them?
Yes, that's.
I'm happy with the liaison and the passage of information between National Trust, Visit Scotland, Homecoming and Event Scotland, and I think on the regions, the clans can contribute, or do contribute very much to the regional and local economies. At the moment, we've got about 35 clan gatherings known of in 2014 out in the regions, and that makes a big difference to those localities in terms of hotels, catering, transport, and visiting heritage sites and so forth. So, out in the regions, that's where the clans really come to life in their historical context.
I could just add to that, actually, within the Visit Scotland marketing channels, we actually have a database of 4,500 what we call gatekeepers. So they might be clan societies or associations, or they might be Scottish interest groups, say Highland Dance Associations, that kind of organisation, and we're in regular contact with that database of 4,500. So that's another channel for us to spread the word and encourage people to come back to Scotland. And that's on top of our international consumer database, which is in excess of 1 million. So those channels are very much in place, and that's what we'll be using to spread the message about Bannockburn clan activities and indeed the homecoming programme as a whole.
Marco, did you have another question?
I had earlier been intending to ask about the future gatherings, but I think it's been well covered by other members. Perhaps, though, Bruce Crawford's question from much earlier about Visit Britain, that, with due respect, Convener, I think you skipped past rather than getting an answer from, is one I would be interested in hearing an answer to, about what involvement there has been from Visit Britain in all of this.
We work very closely with Visit Britain in North America and in other markets throughout the world. Our marketing teams are in close communication with them. They really help to amplify and extend the Visit Scotland activities, but based very much on the messages and material that we design and we ask them to promote for us within the overall Britain umbrella.
Okay, Chick Brody.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I want to have two very small questions. 2014 will be a very good year for Scotland in many ways. Bannockburn being one because it's a great story. And the famous marketing adage is that a brand that has a story to tell has meaning, and a brand that has meaning has impact and resonance. And I'm sure even our welcome visitors from our neighbours down south will enjoy the story. I wonder, though, we want to bring these visitors back. I mean, 2014 is very important. And in two particular issues I'd like to focus on. One is what contact Mr. Selman has been with Keep Scotland Beautiful in terms of cleaning up some of the litter issues that we have around the areas, and perhaps Joanna Boyd can answer that question as well with specific relation to Stirling. And the other question really is for Carlin, in terms of how are we going to capture the information in terms of visitors, in terms of names, addresses, and what marketing follow-up do you see happening to encourage these people to come back to a litter-free, beautiful Scotland?
Joanna, how are you going to keep Stirling litter-free?
Well, it's a very, very good point, if I might say. I have had very recent discussions about exactly that point, Convener. I'm very conscious that a hugely significant part of visitor experience is what is immediately seen. So I think there is a key job that needs to be done in terms of what we were discussing before about the piece of infrastructure that we are very keen to see that would provide us with a gateway to Stirling. So I think it's crucial that these gateways, all the approaches that we arrive at our final destination, are welcoming, they're vibrant, they are litter-free. I mean, as an absolute basic, they ought to be environmentally sound. So I think that there's a really interesting piece of work that we can do with that, involving our communities. And that's something, again, that we've already begun the work on. This is as much about involving our own communities with their own history, and indeed taking that sort of civic pride in terms of their own areas. So, you know, are there fairly basic things that we can do in terms of just getting our city centre looking pristine, and also... No, of course, all of our city centres, absolutely. You know, how are we dressing if there are vacant units in the city, how are we dressing those? How are we making it look as good as we possibly can? Because you're absolutely right, it's not just 2014. If people come to us and have a bad experience, they will not come back. So we have to make that a positive experience. And just, Mr. Brodie, one related point, you mentioned about the IP earlier, and I was reminded that we do actually have a database from that. So it's not, you know, that is clearly very important to us in terms of our marketing going forward. Just wanted to add that additional point of view. Thank you.
Address that marketing point.
On the marketing angle, there are, of course, two strands to any marketing activity. One is acquisition, the second is retention, and retention is equally important. What we want to do is encourage visitors not just to come to Scotland once, but to come back, preferably again and again. During the last homecoming, we actually added almost 3,500 new names to our database, and the opportunities today for keeping in touch with people through email, through social media, are greater than they've ever been before. So it's something that we're very aware of. Going forward too, we'll be able to personalise our online communications to a much greater extent, so that people can indicate what interests them, what's their preferences, and then we can tailor communications accordingly and increase the chance of converting them to a future visit.
It's got a follow-up.
Yeah, very, very brief supplementary on the litter question from Mr. Brodie. With regard to the Bannockburn event, are you confident, and have you got in place the infrastructure for the recycling?
Yes. A whole section of Unique's proposal to us is on recycling, being green, ties very nicely into our own green tourism aspirations for the new site. So yes, there's a whole section of the business plan looking at how we take care of the site, how we encourage people to recycle what they bring and what they leave. So yes, that's covered.
Yeah,
indeed.
Okay, yeah, good. Thank you.
Malcolm first and then Joanna Boyd, yes.
Just refer to Mr. Brodie's point about the future and recurring events, just to reiterate that clan gatherings quite often happen within individual clans on a yearly basis, sometimes every 3, 4, 5 years. So there is already that sort of rolling event infrastructure happening, and we are in discussions at the moment with the Scottish Government in respect of something called the Highland Clans Partnership, which is to, in a low-key way, to fund some of these clan gatherings in the future, hopefully starting from 2014, so that clans can get some basic funding in for their transport, hotel bookings and that sort of thing. So again, that is very much part of the future planning, which which we would support.
Just a very small point, Convener, in relation to recycling. Stirling Council sits at the top of the tree in terms of the amount that we recycle out of the 32 local authorities. So it's certainly an area that we put a very high impetus upon. And of course, I'm sure at an officer level, any assistance that we can give to the National Trust in that regard, we will of course give.
Okay, thank you. I've got two final questions I want to ask, which cover aspects we haven't really covered to any great extent. The first is on the question of governance. This is an event that's being run by the National Trust, a private charity, albeit with quite a substantial contribution from public funds. Who's ultimately responsible for the success of the event and for making sure that that public money is properly accounted for? And how will you measure success? How will we decide at the end of June 2014 that this has worked or not? Mr. Selman.
Yes, Convener. The Trust.
So you're in charge. Who's going to make sure that the public money is properly spent?
The Trust is the client and is clearly working quite closely with its funders as stakeholders and partners. At the point of time that we're speaking to you, we have got commitments of funding and we have a preferred event manager, and we are doing the detailed planning in a very much a coordinated, inclusive way. When we sign the contracts, and we will be signing the contracts between now and June, we will have thrashed out exactly what the measurables are. And in return for the funding, particularly, for example, from food and drink industry, that is clearly to be targeted not at the event in its broadest sense, but at specific aspects of it. So there are detailed measurables which we will be clear when we are signing up to that formally. And I anticipate that in keeping with all our major investments and projects within the National Trust, we would also have a post-project evaluation internally, as well as obviously for our funders.
I sat on the Public Audit Committee when we did the inquiry into the gathering 2009, and we produced a very comprehensive report. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think there are some quite important lessons there in terms of governance and accountability in terms of these types of events which are privately run but with a public contribution.
And just to add to that, in terms of the Event Scotland funding contribution towards that, as Mr. Salmon has said, we work in very close collaboration through every stage of the process and have been now for a number of months. We're represented on the steering group and the working group for the Bannockburn project. We set KPIs as a condition of our funding. Also, an event outcome report is also a condition of our funding. So the governance procedures are very much in place to ensure that the event does generate the return on investment that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Last question, I think, to Mr. McAllister, I think, or Mr. Selman. And Mr. Brodie said 2014 is going to be a big year for Scotland. This event is going to take place, I think, less than 12 weeks before the referendum on Scottish independence in September 2014. How are you going to make sure that the event is not hijacked for political purposes?
Mr. Chairman, Convener, it's an event that we are concentrating on to mark the opening of the new visitor centre and the 700th anniversary, and that is what we are concentrating on. In terms of security, at a political level or at a media level or at a site level, it's not all within our control. At a site level, absolutely clear that the site is going to be under firm control, and the close involvement and liaison with the police, with our partners, etc., means that we don't have any issues or concerns in that regard. Bannockburn has for many years actually been a gathering point, an assembly point from a wide range of individuals on the anniversary date of the battle, and we've learned how to cope with that. In terms of any other media mischief or whatever, we will enjoy the theatre along with everybody else.
So what about people turning up to do political campaigning over the course of the event? Will that be permitted?
We'll send them home to think again.
Well, there are groups and individuals that have been known to us for a long time, and indeed we've made a point of cultivating a relationship with some of our contacts within them, and that dialogue is underway already, and indeed we're working with the police in that regard as well. So there's already an understanding that if there is anybody who wishes to do their own thing, that this is not the time to do it, and that there are other ways in which they can behave and perform. And I think there seems genuinely to be a recognition and an understanding.
So you're actively taking steps to discourage or prevent people.
There's a dialogue going on with those individuals representing various groups that we know have had a long-standing interest in the name and the site. Okay. And we have that under control.
Okay, thank you. Right, if there are no more questions, I think we can draw the session to a close. Thank you very much to our witnesses for coming along. It's been a very comprehensive and quite lengthy session, but we have covered a lot of ground, and that's been very useful to the committee. And at this point, we'll have a short suspension to allow a changeover. Thank you. Now, we have a few moments to hand before the Minister is due to arrive. What I would like to propose is that we move up item 5 on the agenda to review the evidence we've heard and do that in private. And then when the Minister appears, we can go back to item 3. Is that members happy with that approach?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. In that case, we will now go into private session. 3 on the agenda, we are taking evidence on the Legislative Consent Memorandum LCM S4 20.1 in relation to the UK Energy Bill, UK Parliament legislation. And I'm pleased to welcome Fergus Ewing, Minister for Energy, Enterprise and Tourism, who is joined by Mike McElhinney, Head of Electricity Markets, Catherine White, Team Leader, Electricity Market Reform, Scottish Government, and a late substitution, Norman MacLeod, Senior Principal Legal Officer. So welcome all. Before we get into questions, Minister, do you want to say something to introduce the LCM?
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm grateful for the chance to address the committee once again in respect of the UK Energy Bill legislative consent motion in relation to an emissions performance standard, and to provide the committee with an update on the progress made with the UK Government since the previous evidence session on the 27th of February. As the committee knows, the main purpose of the bill is to implement proposals of electricity market reform, EMR. These reforms are crucial to Scotland's future energy mix, to maintain investor confidence, and also to develop our vast renewables potential and also carbon capture and storage technology in Scotland. The reforms will have a significant impact on the energy sector in Scotland, and we've been absolutely clear that in order to maintain the considerable momentum in the renewable industry, EMR must provide the same degree of market certainty that the renewable obligation system delivers and has delivered. At the last session, I advised the committee that we were still in discussions with the UK Government in order to secure the best possible outcome for Scotland. There are some important issues to be addressed, including, first, assurance that the right levels of support will be available for the technologies where Scotland has natural advantages, and second, ensuring that Scotland's engagement in the EMR process is robust, meaningful and clearly set out in legislation. I'm pleased to say that we have made some progress towards that end. Last week, the First Minister met with the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, Ed Davey, and it was agreed, Convener, at that meeting that the two governments will take forward a joint concordat to set out the roles and responsibilities under EMR and to embed the principles of good working practices in an enduring framework. Secondly, we are continuing to work closely with the UK Government in establishing the new regime to support renewable electricity generation, and in particular the first set of strike prices under contracts for difference, which will be consulted on later this year. This work is progressing steadily, and we expect to see outputs in the coming weeks which will give us greater reassurance over the levels of support which are likely to be offered under EMR. Given these positive developments, Convener, and arising from that work with the UK Government, I am now content to recommend the legislative consent motion to the committee for consideration. Turning to the LCM, I should perhaps make it clear that its purpose is for the Scottish Parliament to give consent for the provisions in relation to the Emissions Performance Standard, the EPS, which include extending the executive competence of Scottish Parliament by conferring regulations on Scottish ministers to make powers to be legislated for by the UK Parliament through the UK Energy Bill. This does not mean we are giving powers back to the UK Government. The area remains devolved and within the competence of the Scottish Parliament. We are, however, subscribing to the uniform application of the EPS across the UK, and we have done this because we believe the EPS strikes the right balance between investor certainty and appropriate support for decarbonisation. The UK Energy Bill represents an appropriate and proportionate legislative vehicle to enable these provisions to apply across the UK, whilst acknowledging the powers of Scottish ministers in this area. In closing, Convener, I know there is great interest in the outcomes of the Energy Bill, and I have scheduled a debate on the matter in Parliament for Thursday the 16th of May to bring the wider proposals of EMR back to the Chamber before the summer recess. This will allow the whole Scottish Parliament the opportunity to fully consider the impact of these proposals, and I hope come to a consensus on the value of these provisions and the role for the Scottish Parliament within them. As Minister for Energy, Enterprise and Tourism, I would therefore invite the committee to agree that the relevant provisions of the UK Energy Bill relating to an emissions performance standard, so far as these matters fall within the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament should be considered by the UK Parliament. I therefore invite the committee to support this LCM. I'm happy to seek to respond to members' questions.
Okay, thank you, Minister. It gladdens my heart to hear such warm relations between Scotland's two governments working together on this very important matter. Specifically on this question of the EPS, if the LCM is passed in due course by Parliament, will there be any further opportunities for Parliament to scrutinise the EPS? For example, will it come to Parliament by means of secondary legislation?
Well, there will always be opportunities for the Scottish Parliament to scrutinise work going forward. The EPS itself is one of the mechanisms proposed in EMR with the aim of providing a regulatory backstop on the amount of emissions new fossil fuel power stations can emit, and the UK-wide EPS will apply to all new fossil fuel plant over 50 megawatt E from 2014, and it will become, the EPS will become law from January 2014 following Royal Assent at 2013. Plainly, the purpose of an LCM is to enable the UK government to legislate in these matters, but to legislate within the confines of the wording of the LCM. And I would stress that we will retain power over rocks meantime, whilst working towards their replacement in the long term by contracts for difference. So we are, if you like, passing by the LCM power over determining this matter in the electricity market reform legislation to the UK government, but we're doing so on the basis of the working that's taking place, the assurances that have been given, and the desire to work together with the UK government in the integrated energy market, which we think is the right way to deliver electricity to consumers and to gain the advantages for industry that renewable energy and CCS can provide.
Thank you. We obviously previously had a evidence session on this, so we've probably covered quite a lot of the ground in that we might cover today, but I'm sure members have got a few questions they want to ask. Rhoda Grant.
Given what you've said about not remitting the power to the UK government, how can the Scottish government change the EPS in Scotland in future if we pass this LCM?
Well, you know, we believe it's sensible to work with the UK government on this matter, and our aspirations for the future of Scotland after a successful result in the referendum next year are that we should continue to work positively with the government at Westminster. That is the way that we believe that we should work, and the reason that we do that is because we think that there should continue to be an integrated market that serves the interests of all concerned. And therefore, given that that's the case, and given that's the overriding objective and viewpoint of what is desirable and indeed correct, it makes sense to reach an agreement about important matters by a process of negotiation and discussion. Once agreement is reached, then we proceed on the basis of that agreement, and if it emerges later that there are good reasons to change that particular decision, then we would do so. But there has to be a process of working with goodwill behind the scenes in a constructive fashion, as I think I hope this convener exemplifies that we are doing today. I can say, however, that the level of EPS will be set, of course, in the primary legislation, and there are plans that it be reviewed after a period of 5 years. So that does give, I think, a sensible period of review.
Would you then, if it's in the principal legislation, which is UK legislation, is there any mechanism that would allow a Scottish government to change the EPS other than if this being opened up again by the UK government?
No. I mean, the agreement...
Will I take that?
Well, Mr MacLeod will give a legal opinion.
The straightforward answer to that question is that the devolved competence of the Scottish Parliament is not altered. The Parliament will be able to legislate in a devolved area in the same way as it can today. So the LCM is a matter of consent for the UK Parliament to legislate in a devolved area. So it doesn't alter the Scottish Parliament's powers.
So if next year or the year after the Scottish Government decided that the EPS was not right for Scotland, they wanted to change it in Scotland, they could legislate. There is nothing stopping them legislating.
Matter of law, the powers don't change. So there's no change to the powers of the Scottish
I
Parliament.
mean, I think as a matter of practice, we're reaching an agreement here. We're not planning to change it. And, I've said before, Convener, I'm not particularly keen on speculating on hypotheses about what might happen next year.
I'm not asking for a hypothesis, I'm just asking
we're
for a
taking
yes
a
or no
decision
answer.
now, which we are taking because we believe it's the right decision. The legal advice is that the devolved competence remains the same, and therefore we could take a different view, but that's not what we expect will happen. We're taking a decision today as part of a bigger picture where we're intending to get a good deal for consumers, for Scotland, for electricity supply, for investment, and to take advantage of the huge opportunities that are available to Scotland. To do that, to advance that, you must have a practical system of reaching agreement with all of those involved and then sticking to it. So that is what we envisage. The review will take place in 5 years' time, and that is the basis upon which we are proceeding, rather than looking into sort of theoretical legal possibilities that might be postulated by members.
Okay, that wasn't my question. My question was, are we handing this power back to Westminster, or do we still have power to legislate and change this out with the UK Parliament allowing us to do that? Yes or no?
Well, the legal advice I've had, Ms MacLeod will correct me if I'm wrong, is that the powers that we have remain the same as conferred on us by the Scotland Act, but we're choosing to use those powers in the way that we think is correct for Scotland.
You're saying yes, we can.
Well, I've answered the question 3 times now.
I'm having difficulty understanding why it's so difficult to say yes or no. Why you just can't give me a straightforward answer to that?
I have.
I don't believe you have.
Well, we'll have to disagree then.
Can we move on then and say, obviously the Scottish Government have set targets for decarbonising the grid. Given the EPS and where it's set, this will not encourage CCS. What steps will the Scottish Government ensure that their decarbonisation targets are met?
Well, as the member knows, we are extremely keen to see that carbon capture and storage is encouraged. We are delighted that the exciting project at Peterhead has been awarded funding from DEC CCS commercialisation competition. That's a good result for Scotland. We worked behind the scenes to help secure that result, and we are delighted that that is the case. It's one of the most exciting projects there is in Scotland today. I hope all members are supportive of that, and we understand that the companies involved are also proceeding with that and not being deterred, as Rhoda Grant seems to be suggesting. There is a second possible project which was not successful in the capital element of the commercialisation competition. That is the Summit Power, the Captain Clean Energy project, which may take place in Scotland as well. And that too is an exciting project. I'm not aware that the company is deterred in the way that the member suggests. Perhaps I may have the benefit on her since I met with them recently. They're very keen to proceed in Scotland. They weren't talking about this matter of the decarbonisation target as a deterrent. They're very hopeful that an agreement can be reached. We are very supportive of them coming to Scotland, and we are working very closely with them and everybody else and DEC to ensure that they have every chance of being able to proceed with this project, provided, of course, they go through the regulatory processes, and in particular Planning Commission, of course, cannot be prejudiced. But that Summit Power project offers a very exciting opportunity to Scotland, and I'm not aware, maybe the members had discussions with the company of which you can bring us up to date, but I'm not aware that they're being deterred by the emissions performance standards on this matter.
It appears to me that, and I don't think it would take anyone more than with basic economics to figure it out, that if you're building a gas-fired power station and you have the choice to build it with CCS or without CCS, and there is nothing incentivising or pushing you towards CCS, you wouldn't spend that money because you would be competing with other generators that were not using CCS. How do you make it stack up? At the moment, of course, people are keen because there's government funding there, pushing that technology forward, and people are willing to explore that. But how do you incentivise that in the long term for all fossil fuel power stations?
Well, the Summit Power scheme is not a gas scheme, it's a coal scheme. It's a pre-combustion coal scheme, and the way in which it could proceed would be through receiving an adequate contract for difference.
So CCS is dependent on government funding totally into the future?
Well, the whole purpose of having EMR is to incentivise forms of provision of electricity that require subsidy because they're young, immature technologies that haven't been fully tried and tested. Now, carbon capture and storage is a series of technologies, each of which has been tested, but they haven't perhaps been proven altogether. I think the convener questioned me on this before. Renewables technologies such as wave wind and wave offshore wind and tidal are at a relatively early stage of development. Because that is the case for carbon capture and storage and wave and tidal and offshore wind, they require incentivisation. That's the whole point of EMR, and that's why CCS, we expect, will have a strike price, will have a CFD, will have ongoing income support, and both the UK government and ourselves, and as far as I was aware up until this moment, convener, the Labour Party thought this was a good idea.
We believe it's a good idea, but we believe that you should be setting emissions targets to incentivise that, and I don't understand how you expect to push all fossil fuel generators to install CCS if you don't have yes carrots, but surely sticks as well to make that happen.
Well, the Electricity Market Reform Bill does provide, I think, a method in theory, namely the contracts for difference, which can provide sufficient stimulus for CCS to proceed. And the reduction by the use of carbon capture and storage technology of the amount of carbon that is emitted from the use of coal, as in case of Summit Power, if that goes ahead, or gas in Peterhead, will be very substantial. In other words, the whole purpose is to incentivise a technology that can deliver fossil fuel but without the carbon emissions, and can store the carbon and perhaps use that carbon for other purposes, such as enhanced oil recovery, which Summit Power do in the USA, thereby delivering an additional income stream using the carbon stored. In the case of the USA, it's onshore, underground, and using that storage of carbon to deliver more oil than would otherwise be recovered. Now, we're talking about very, very exciting technology. It's absolutely right that there should be the appropriate incentivization for it to be developed in the UK and in the EU. And that, I think, conveners, is basically the policy across the EU. The trouble is, up till now, it hasn't actually been delivered by anybody. That's where we stand. And what we want for Scotland and the SNP is to be at the forefront of this, not at the coup's tail. And that's why we are so keen. And I hope that the Labour Party will support us in taking advantage of the opportunities which now exist under EMR to deliver them. Now, I don't know if my officials have got anything, perhaps there are technical details that I haven't covered that maybe convener Mr McElhenney could.
Perhaps just picking up a couple of points there. Because CCS isn't the only form of low carbon generation that the electricity market reform process through contracts for difference seeks to incentivise or improve the relative economics of. The strike prices for and contracts for difference will extend to all types of low carbon generating technologies, including onshore wind, offshore wind, wave, tidal and nuclear. But you spoke about carrots and sticks, and there are other parts of the electricity market reform policy framework that are the sticks for unabated carbon generation. There's a carbon price floor in there to make unabated fossil fuel generation less economic relative to types of low carbon generation, which other parts of the electricity market reform policy frameworks are designed to incentivise. So there are a sort of there are a balance of sort of, carrots and sticks in the electricity market reform programme, the interaction of which is intended to improve the relative economics of low carbon generation, where there's an upfront investment hurdle to address either through the deployment and capital costs that more established renewable technologies need, or as the Minister referred to, incentivising development of more nascent technologies like CCS. So there is a sort of balance of measures in there intended to both incentivise low carbon and disincentivise unabated carbon generation.
I should make it clear, Convener, because I don't think I did so earlier, that whilst the Captain Clean Energy project wasn't in the top 2 of the commercialisation competition, it remains on the reserve list, and that's very important. If one of the top 2 were to not proceed, then that would give the opportunity to Summit Power, and in fairness to the company, that's an important point. I just should make that for the record.
One more question.
One more question. The Scottish Government have set a different grid decarbonisation target than the UK Government. If you give away one of the tools you have to reach that, how on earth do you reach it? What tools are left? Saying it is not good enough, you have to have something to make it happen.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that question. I think Mr McElhenney did.
I'll come in on that. I mean, I suppose first to say that we have set a decarbonisation target, 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour for 2030, but the UK has not yet set one. So it's not that we are at odds with the UK government on that. But they have a process now by which they will set one in legislation through the energy bill, and that's very much part of our discussions with the UK government on the energy bill. So. And I think we would recognise, and others have recognised, including the Committee on Climate Change, that the EPS is not designed to solely achieve a decarbonisation target, and we have other mechanisms by which we would do that, and principally some of the devolved measures we have in through thermal consents and some of our demand reduction energy efficiency improvements very much see as a package, a balance of measures to achieve the decarbonisation target. And over time we will, develop more detailed understanding of how that will be achieved, but we think it is achievable. We've done some work to show that it can be achieved. So that's our target for 2030, and we're working with the UK government in how they will go ahead and set their decarbonisation target for 2030, which they have committed to doing, just not until 2016.
And as Kat says, the bill will be amended to give the UK government a statutory power to set a decarbonisation target from 2016. As part of our negotiations with our UK colleagues, we have agreed that Scottish ministers will have a statutory role in setting that target at that point. So the First Minister announced a non-statutory decarbonisation target that we'll work towards, start to work towards now, and we're part of that process in 2016 to set a legislative. I think it's the first decarbonisation target that will be set in legislation in the world. I think our DEC colleagues claim. So the sort of principle there is working with the UK government, because the sort of achievement of decarbonisation target is not something that the Scottish Government will deliver on its own, but working with the UK, we can take the right steps and put the right mechanisms in place to try to do so.
Mike McKenzie.
Thank you, Convener. You touched, Minister, on the idea of a integrated UK energy market, and I think that's a good principle, and I think the cooperation of the two governments towards that is a good principle. But the committee had a visit from the European Energy Commissioner a few weeks ago, who explained that he was very keen on an integrated European energy market, and and commended that approach to us as offering energy security and so on. He didn't seem to feel that the impediments in achieving that were national or political boundaries, provided each government cooperated in the way that the Scottish and the UK government are doing. Do you commend that approach, and do you see a future that leads us towards a more integrated European energy market?
Well, we're certainly working towards that objective with others. For example, on the British Irish Council, the Isles project has been taken forward with goodwill from all participants. And indeed, the Isles project, which would see greater interconnection between the UK and the North and South and Ireland, would enable a much greater degree of integration. Now, that project, I understand, is further ahead than perhaps any other potential a project in the EU, and perhaps there's a greater enthusiasm for it than other parts of the EU. So that's one example of work which is designed to work towards more integration between member states, between countries. And after all, the greater interconnectivity there can be, the easier it is, in theory at least, to manage the grid. Because part of the problems of grid management are to do with intermittency, with variety of sources of supply, with fluctuating costs, particularly fossil fuel, which has driven electricity prices ever higher. So the ability to have a European market in the longer term, and we're talking decades, I'm afraid, rather than single years, will in the long term provide enormous potential benefits, I think. And our approach is to work constructively with the EU, which we do in the Commission in Brussels, as well as our colleagues in DEC and in Ireland, both North and South.
Thank you. And just one further question. That when I talk to people involved in the energy industry, they all tell me that there's been, a considerable period of uncertainty and nervousness concerning the passage of this UK bill, and that the industry is really, as I say, nervous and concerned. But they tell me that compared to that, they have very little nervousness about the possibility of constitutional change in Scotland. Do you agree that there is a great deal of frustration in the industry and nervousness with regard to the passage of this bill?
Just say yes, please.
Well, it's a very serious question, convener. It deserves to be taken very seriously. I think what I would say is that there is undoubtedly a risk, and this has been expressed by industry, by leaders of utility companies in particular, that because there are no set of rules at the moment replacing ROCs, then it's very difficult to see how there can be investor confidence. I mean, if you have a market which requires incentives, and you don't know what those incentives are in the UK, but you know what they are in Germany, then it's difficult to see why it would be reasonable to expect a board of trustees or investors to come to the conclusion that you invest in a place which has got no clarity of rules. Now, that's where we are at the moment for projects that cannot be commenced beyond 2017 and therefore wouldn't qualify for the ROCs. And therefore, there is, as a matter of fact, I think, and I don't think this is a political statement nor one of great controversy, there is a hiatus at the moment. And that's because it's taken so long to get to this stage. And as long as that hiatus exists, convener, it's very difficult for us to build on the successful work that we've achieved in attracting so many companies to make a commitment to Scotland for manufacturing turbines, for example, for offshore wind, if they don't know what the rules are. And that, incidentally, is also why the 2030 decarbonisation target is, we believe, the right approach, and why we will continue to urge the UK government, as was done in the Decarbonisation Committee in the House of Commons, I think, very recently, to bring forward their plans from 2016. I mean, we seek to continue to persuade them to do that, because, putting it bluntly, if you want a turbine manufacturer to locate in the UK and they think that there's no clear vision of government commitment beyond 2020, then why would they create a factory for 4 or 5 years? It doesn't really make a great deal of sense. That simple argument lies behind the commercial rationale, convener, for having a 2030 decarbonisation target. And whereas we think we may have some support within the UK coalition for that view, it may be that there remains division within the ranks. But nonetheless, we will continue to have positive and amicable discussions in this in this regard. So thank you for that question. It wasn't the most difficult question I've had.
Were it not so late in the morning, Minister, I'd be delighted to pursue this argument with you. But I think, given the time, we'll stick to the matter in hand. I'll bring in Alison Johnson.
During the last evidence session on this LCM, the design of the strike price for CCS was identified as a key determinant for negotiations. And I noticed in your statement, Minister, you mentioned there's a joint concordat to take forward EMR, and that the first set of strike prices will be confirmed later this year. Are negotiations, are they going forward as well as you might hope? Are you confident that there'll be an agreement that will meet your requirements?
I'll pass over to Mike McElhenney in a moment, but what I would say is that we are working positively with DEC in order to see that the strike prices which are proposed will be strike prices which will have the right balance between the interests of the consumer and the interests of the investor and industry. In other words, that the level of incentive will be the right level of incentive. These are difficult matters. I mean, set aside the politics, these are genuinely very difficult matters. And it's wrong to pretend otherwise. Therefore, there will be an announcement of the strike prices, but that, as I understand it, and Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, is going to go to a consultation, and that therefore there will be a chance for a debate on all of these matters. And that's a good thing, because I don't actually think that government should come forward and say this is the way it's going to be without there being a very good engagement, especially with those in industry who have to deliver the projects, and then they will have the opportunity to put evidence in order that we can, by that process, arrive at the correct prices. What I'm particularly concerned about, to answer Ms Johnson's question, is that the strike prices should cover all Scottish interests, obviously, and particularly the need to provide a solution as one means of providing a solution for the island charging mechanism, about which I've spoken at some length in previous meetings. And I just, for the record, state that that really is a top priority for us. But also, I've mentioned already that CCS projects do need a strike price. They do need support, and therefore we want to make sure that is correct as well. I think where we perhaps disagree with the approach that the UK government seems minded to take is its desire to see a number of new nuclear power stations. On financial grounds, we think that's the wrong approach, and I should just state that that remains our position plainly. But I hope that that answers at a general level Alison Johnson's question, but perhaps Mr McElhenney, with your permission, Convener, could give some more detail in his comments.
There's on the Minister outlined the position sort of pretty much as is at the moment. On the process side, we've been working with DEC colleagues since about last November in a mechanism involved administration consultation group with our colleagues in Northern Ireland and Ireland. And with National Grid as the EMR delivery body that will set and maintain the strike price mechanisms to assess on a sort of robust and sort of defensible and evidence-based approach for setting strike prices for different types of technologies. That involves sort of things like levelised cost prices for different types of technology and the current levels of support and the sort of capital and deployment costs. So all of that sort of analytical detail has been gone, pretty much parallel to the parliamentary process. That's coming to a conclusion. We expect we're very excited that we're going to see the draft strike prices on the 1st of May. Certainly the civil service part of us are very excited. And then quieter sometimes than I would like. And then we're sort of into that process that Mr Ewing outlined, that we will then have to sort of brief the Minister on whether we think these strike prices are in the right range for what we want to try and deliver with the Scottish technology strengths that we have. We've also separately been keeping very close contact with sort of players in the Scottish energy sector across the technologies to understand from them what kind of strike price they would like us to try and deliver for Scottish developers from that. There will then, by the end of June, be a draft delivery plan published by DEC, which will set out what the strike prices will be followed by a period of public consultation with a view to finalising the strike prices in autumn of this year. So the process is in place, and the process has been the sort of the concordat that we referred to puts that process on an enduring footing because it sets out the principles on the forward principles on which that will take place.
For that, will the Minister suggested be looking at the progress on transmission charges regarding the islands too?
At the same time as we signed the Concordat, we are working that ministers in Scotland and UK ministers can make a joint statement on what we will do in response to the intergovernmental steering group on renewables, which we have been working hard with our DEC colleagues on. We commissioned a consultants report which has assessed and identified barriers to deployment of renewable technologies on each of the main Scottish island groups, the Western Isles, Shetland and the Orkneys. We have the draft report in near final stage. We intend to publish it very shortly. And alongside that, there's an assessment process now has to be done about the options that we have for addressing the challenges of that developers face in each of the islands. So we hope to make that part of the Concordat process, part of the sort of joint working that we have developed over the Concordat process, to the point that Scottish ministers with DEC ministers can give a degree of certainty to developers on the island that the mechanisms that will apply and the options and interventions that might be necessary to improve the relative economics of renewable development on the islands are delivered jointly, seamlessly, and the particular challenge on that one is that they're developed quickly.
I'll follow up on strike prices and then I'll come back to you.
Just addressing, good afternoon, Mike's question. I haven't had the chance of meeting Ed Davey other than briefly here, but I did have an exchange of correspondence with him regarding subsidies for nuclear plants, to which the Minister just alluded, in that I asked him to confirm the situation on subsidies for nuclear plants, and he said, of course, there will be no subsidies. Then that's on page 1, and on page 2 then goes to confirm what you've just said on decommissioning costs will obviously impact on the strike price. And if we look at what Sellafield says is going to cost them £65.5 billion to decommission, I can imagine where they're going to try and position that in relative terms, given the UK government's rush to nuclear plants. You know, on that, while I have no real problem with the LCM, the Minister did make the point about the investment, and clearly, given that situation, or potential situation with nuclear plants, that means investment potentially could be divested from other areas of low carbon electricity generation. I mean, what is going to be the position if we see the strike price for nuclear being set at such a level that we find it unacceptable, on the basis that we've passed this LCM?
Well, I mean, our principal view on new nuclear power stations, I think, is clear. There's no point restating that, and we also do support that where there are existing nuclear power stations to run professionally well, they should be allowed to continue, and that is sensible. My understanding is that, and Mr. McElhenney will, as always, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it's really unlikely that any new nuclear power station could actually be built before the end of the period in respect of which the levy control framework exists. And therefore, while there is a concern that any subsidy to nuclear in a fixed pot reduces the amount of subsidy, of incentivisation of money, I think the figure in the levy control framework is, I think, is 7.6 billion to 2020. But you see, if the nuclear power stations can't be built before then, and it doesn't seem that they're likely to be, then logically they won't really be in a position to use up any or much of that money. So that may not be the answer that Mr. Brodie was sort of anticipating. But on a principled level, you know, we do think there is a case that, you know, if you take the view that CCS is one of the essential elements to meeting the 2030 target, and indeed meeting Europe's targets to decarbonise the production of electricity using fossil fuels, if it's a sine qua non of Europe meeting its targets, then we want to get on with it. We don't want to plough lots of money into new nuclear power stations, where money is always going to be finite and under pressure because of tough economic conditions. So, I mean, these are legitimate arguments, and I think the arguments probably will take place within the UK coalition, I suspect, and I don't think they're resolved as yet. So, you know, I think Mr. Brodie is right to raise an argument which, in the first site may not affect renewables or CCS, but actually will do by potentially over the longer term delimiting the total amount of cash subsidy that will come from the consumers ultimately to deliver a modern decarbonised electricity supply in the UK, where decarbonised sources provide a much greater proportion of the total electricity. I don't know if that covers the question, Mike, does it?
Again, on the sort of at a policy level and at a process level, new nuclear power stations will be eligible for a strike price for CFD. That will have an impact on the overall levy control framework funding that is available. If you follow that argument through, that will then have an impact on what is left to be available for other types of low carbon generating technologies. And we've been trying to stay close to the negotiations that our DEC colleagues are having with the first new nuclear development in England at EDF at Hinkley Point, where they are arranging they have a process in place to arrange a bespoke strike price for first move nuclear. So we are very keen to understand the financial implications of that. We have an agreement with DEC that when we get to that stage that we will see that, and we will be able to make that assessment in the relative context of the remaining levy control framework funds, and it's a potential policy tension.
Thank you.
Alison, you have a question?
Yes, just a quick question. Would a refurbished Cockenzie power station fall under the new regime?
Sorry, take that possibly. Just there are conditions where some major refurbishments trigger the EPS, but I think it would depend on the nature of the refurbishment and then the technical detail under probably the secondary legislation. To just clarify that, yeah.
I think. Sorry, I was thrown by this refurbished. I mean, I think the Cockenzie was coal-fired. I don't think there's any suggestion that there's going to be a coal-fired refurbished power station at Cockenzie. Do you mean if there's a new gas-fired power station? Right. Okay.
Well, Scottish Power already have consent to build a combined cycle gas turbine plant at Cockenzie. That consent is based on a number of conditions. One of the conditions is that it's carbon capture ready and carbon capture technology is deployed when it becomes commercially viable to do so. The consent is quite sort of, I think the consent is quite well sort of set out that that there's a process in there whereby Scottish Power would be expected to report on a regular basis as we go into the future about whether that commercial deployment stage had happened or not yet. Ultimately, the decision on whether or not they will develop the Cockenzie site is a commercial matter for Scottish Power.
Sorry, I should clarify. I didn't quite pick up that. But if the gas plant at Cockenzie would proceed on the current consent as it has, it would not trigger the EPS because the EPS deadline is after that consent was given. Sorry, that's a bit convoluted, but it's new thermal plant. And so because the consent was given prior to the bill being tabled, a plant built on that consent would not be subject to an EPS.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Right, if there are no other questions, I think we can draw the session to a close. Thank you, Minister. Thank you to your officials for coming along. Just before we go into private session, I would just confirm the committee will be considering its recommendation and draft report on the LCM at a future meeting, not at this meeting. And I'd be grateful if members would agree that our future consideration of the draft report on the LCM should be taken in private. Yep. Agreed? Yep. Thank you. Okay, with that we move into private session. Thank you.